Okay, so first of all, okay, in cellular respiration, okay, we are mostly going to be looking at the mitochondria, okay? So the mitochondria is called the powerhouse of the cell. The mitochondria is what breaks down the glucose to produce ATP, okay? Again, we have a balanced chemical equation, okay, that shows us the same amount of atoms on one side as on the other. So here we have our sugar molecule, the C6H12O6 plus 6 molecules of oxygen give you ATP, 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, and 6 molecules of water, okay? So again, that's a formula that you need to know, not just the products and the reactants, but the balanced equation, okay? Energy in the form of ATP is a molecule, okay? It actually is a organic molecule. It's got some phosphates, and it's got adenine in it, which is one of the things that builds nucleotides, okay? So if it is made of nucleotides, what kind of organic molecule is this? It's a nucleic acid, okay? So we know about DNA and we know about RNA, but ATP is actually also a nucleic acid, okay? So it's not transferring genetic information, it is transferring energy stored in the bonds of those phosphate groups, okay? So in order to make this energy, we have to bring in oxygen and we have to bring in glucose, okay? Glucose obviously being the source. Our bodies then use the oxygen to convert glucose into wastewater, carbon dioxide, and then the actual ATP molecule itself is built through this process, okay? The carbon dioxide and the water that are created in this process are waste products, okay? The carbon dioxide is a toxic, useless product to us. The water that is created as waste can still be useful in other parts of our cells, okay? So the water we hang on to, the carbon dioxide is released through what? How do we get rid of carbon dioxide in our bodies? Through breathing, okay? We breathe it out as we breathe in oxygen, okay? All right, so when the body has oxygen, we undergo aerobic respiration. So just like when we talked about bacteria, we talked about there being obligate anaerobes. Those are the bacteria that have to have the presence of oxygen. Aerobic respiration has to have the presence of oxygen, okay? So aerobic means oxygen present or oxygen having, okay? So when you have oxygen present, you undergo this aerobic cellular respiration. Most of the time when we're talking about cellular respiration, we're talking about aerobic cellular respiration, okay? So the majority of the time, if you see a quiz, test question, anything like that, and it's talking about respiration, we're probably going to be talking about aerobic respiration unless they specify otherwise, okay? So as aerobic respiration takes place, our overall energy output is 38 of these energy molecules. And what are the energy molecules called? ATP, okay? So there are 3 main stages of aerobic respiration. The first one is called glycolysis, okay? The second one is called the Krebs cycle. And then the third one is called the electron transport chain. So we're going to look at each of those steps. But so just like we had the light and the dark cycle for photosynthesis where the products from one become the reactants of the other, we have some of that as well. So each of these steps is kind of building into each other. So you have a diagram, okay, that looks like this, and this kind of shows you where this is happening, okay? So glycolysis doesn't actually take place in the mitochondria itself. It takes place outside of the mitochondria in the cytoplasm, okay? So not every cell in the world has mitochondria. Which kind of cells do not have mitochondria? Prokaryotes, right? But they can still do glycolysis. They can still break down sugars because they have cytoplasm, and then they go through a different kind of respiration, okay? And so then the Krebs cycle and your electron transport chain are going to happen inside the mitochondria. The electron transport chain for cellular respiration is very, very similar to the one that we observed with photosynthesis. It literally is just the movement of excited electrons providing energy to break or make chemical bonds, okay? So when we're seeing electron transport chain, it's that same movement of negatively charged particles moving things around. Okay, so our first step is glycolysis, again, in the cytoplasm of the cell. Our overall gain for ATP in glycolysis is 2, okay? So as the sugar is broken down, 2 ATP molecules are created, okay? You also get 2 NADH molecules, which are those enzymes, the things that are helping stuff to happen, and then you get 2 molecules of what are called pyruvate, okay? So pyruvate are kind of the currency that's going to be used for the rest of these steps, okay? Glycolysis is a process where glucose is broken down. So again, lysis means releasing, breaking, destroying, something like that. So glycolysis or glycolysis is the breaking down of sugar, okay? And this is where you get your 2 pyruvic acid molecules or pyruvates, okay? And these are carbon-based molecules, okay? So pyruvic acid is a carbon-based molecule. So some of the carbons from your C6H12O6 are transferring into pyruvic acids, right? We have 2 pyruvic acids because we had how many carbons?
3.
We had how many altogether? C6H12O6, which means we have how many carbons? 6, okay? Pyruvic acid is a 3-carbon molecule, so how many pyruvic acids do we have? 2, okay? We create 2 from that. From here, we're only looking at the energy gain of one of these molecules, okay? But you do need to know that it's 2 that are created, okay? So once we go through glycolysis, the pyruvic acid is then going to move from the cytoplasm into the mitochondria, okay? So glycolysis occurs in 2 steps, or 2 phases with 10 different steps, so 5 each. One is called an energy investment phase where you get negative feedback, okay? One is called an energy yielding phase where you get positive feedback. We're not going to go deeply into these, okay? But just knowing that they are controlled by homeostatic control. So negative feedback means something is not there, it starts. Positive feedback means something is there, then it's going to stop. So it's going to try and help maintain balance in this process, okay? So in our energy investment phase, 2 of our ATPs are being used, right? And we're getting an ADP plus an extra phosphate, which is going to give us an adenosine diphosphate plus an extra phosphate is going to give you ATP, adenosine triphosphate, okay? And then we have a bunch of other enzymes and molecules and things like that that are kind of moving around in these areas, okay? So our energy is being invested in the ADP and phosphate bond, okay? And then we create our ATP, okay? So this is kind of going through a bunch of different steps, a bunch of different molecules are moving around. But you have your ADP, the energy being invested in that to create the yield of ATP, okay? So on our balance sheet for glycolysis, okay, how many total ATPs are going to be produced?
2. 4. 0.
Well, the board says 4, okay?
2. Oh, because it does it twice.
Because it does it twice, right? Okay? So we've got 4 ATP that are produced, okay? This is actually an ATP using step as well, okay? So you're going to have 2 ATPs that are used to help create this step, okay? How many NADH molecules are produced?
2.
Okay. How many FADH molecules are produced? 0, okay? And then we have water having been produced. There's 2 waters. All right, and then our starting molecule was what? What did we start with?
Glucose.
We started with glucose, and then what's our finishing molecule?
ATP.
The ATP is there, but that's not what we're breaking down. What did our sugars break down into?
Water.
ADP.
The carbon-containing molecules called
Pyruvate.
pyruvate, okay? So our glucose was broken into 2 pyruvates, okay? That's just the first step. So when we broke that molecule down, a little bit of energy was created, okay? A little bit of energy was created, but now we've got a whole bunch of energy stored in these pyruvate molecules, okay, or the pyruvic acid, and we move into the next step, which is called the citric acid cycle or the Krebs cycle, or there's another couple of different names, but usually it's called the Krebs cycle, okay? So now your pyruvic acid enters this cycle, and it's going to become broken down, okay? So as this occurs, 6 carbon dioxide molecules are going to be released, okay? And in addition to that, again, as we're breaking down this molecule, we're breaking chemical bonds, we're going to release some energy, okay? So we've got 2 ATP molecules that are also being released, okay? So glycolysis happened in the cytoplasm. The Krebs cycle happens inside of the mitochondria in what's called the matrix, okay? So the mitochondria have a inner membrane that's all like kind of folded and zigzag looking. In the middle of that is where this process is going to be taking place, okay? The reason that the membrane inside the mitochondria is all zigzaggy and folded is because it increases the amount of surface area that this can happen. So the more places and cubbies that you can create for cellular respiration, the more energy that you can harvest, right? Just like our chloroplasts were jam-packed full of thylakoids so that we can do more photosynthesis, okay? So your Krebs cycle has a whole lot going on, okay? The NAD plus they're the enzymes. They're the molecules that are making things happen, okay? So the NAD and the FAD, right, are helping this process to go forward, okay? But essentially, we're looking at creating a couple more ATP molecules, okay? So using some of those excited electrons to turn ADP into ATP. And really what we're creating here is our carbon dioxide waste, okay? So it's going to continue to kind of cycle around. Molecules are being broken down. Energy is being invested throughout this cycle, okay? Okay, so in the Krebs cycle, how many ATP are produced? 2 are produced. How many are used? None are being used. How many NADH molecules? 8. Okay. How many FADH molecules? 2. FADH is 2. How many carbon dioxides?
6.
How many waters? None. Okay. But we did use some of our water here, right? So some of the water that we have is broken apart to make those positively charged hydrogen ions and a little bit of oxygen, okay? So how many waters were used? 2, okay? So what was our starting molecule here? What are we breaking down here? The pyruvate, okay? And then what are we creating?
Citric acid.
The citric acid is what's being broken down.
ATP.
We do, again, have a little bit of ATP. What are we creating? Carbon dioxide, okay? So carbon dioxide is the finishing molecule here. Okay? What do cells do with the carbon dioxide? They release it as waste, okay? Carbon dioxide is not helpful. All right, so then we go through the electron transport chain. So there's one here, just like there's one in photosynthesis where electrons are helping things to move around. Another name for the electron transport chain is called chemiosmosis, okay? Osmosis meaning what kind of transport? Passive transport, okay? Osmosis is passive transport. All right, so the ETC is the last step of respiration, and this is where your stuff is going to be ending up. So we've gone through glycolysis, we've gone through the Krebs cycle, and we've created all those different molecules. This is where they're going to get used up, and this is where the majority of your energy is going to be created, okay? So in the presence of oxygen, the electron transport chain is going to produce 34 ATP molecules and 6 water molecules, okay? We're creating 34 ATP molecules and 6 waters. Okay? The water here is considered to be a byproduct or a waste product, okay? Because it's not really the point of what we are doing, okay? ATP really is the goal of this, okay? Water is useful and water is obviously created here, okay? But our main product is going to be the ATP, okay? The grand total of ATP molecules released from aerobic respiration is 38, okay? Because some of them had to be used before to power the different processes of the cell, okay? So you have to spend energy to make energy, but we've had significantly more energy created than we had spent, okay? And again, this is an ideal, okay? This is, if everything is perfect and works exactly like it should, this is what you will get, okay? It is not always what you will get, okay? But somewhere between 34 and 38 ATP is what you should expect to get out of cellular respiration, okay? Okay, so on our balance sheet, for ETC, how many ATP are produced? 34. How many ATP were used? 0. How many NADH are used? None. How many FADH produced?
0.
How many carbon dioxides produced?
0.
How many waters produced? 6. Okay. How many waters used? 0. Okay. So our starting molecules here were all of those enzymes that were helping things to happen. Okay. So one of our starting molecules is oxygen. So this is where the oxygen part of our reactants come in. And then the other ones are your NADH and your FADH. Your NADH and your FADH and your oxygen are what we started this with. And then we end up with 2 things, which are ATP and water. Okay? So our totals are 40 ATP produced, 2 have been used. We've got 10 NADH that were produced, 2 FADH, 6 carbon dioxides, 8 waters were produced, but 2 of them were used, okay? And then we started with what 2 things? What are our reactants? Glucose and oxygen, right? Our reactants are glucose and oxygen, and our finishing molecules are ATP and water, and there's one more. Carbon dioxide, okay? ATP, water, and carbon dioxide. Up there on the top of that thing. Okay. So if we look at the electron transport chain, okay, or what's called chemiosmosis, so what's happening in that last step here is, again, those positively charged hydrogen ions are moving through diffusion, and just like we saw with photosynthesis, they're moving through an ATP synthase, and that's where your ADP is turning into ATP, okay? Your NADH and your FADH are converted into ATP during this stage of cellular respiration, so that's where some of it's coming from. Each one of your NADH molecules converts to 3 ATP. Each of your FADH molecules converts to 2 ATP, okay? So each one of these different molecules is producing a bunch of different ATPs in different places of this chain at the same time, okay? So this is one that looks a little bit like the one that we did with photosynthesis, okay? We're not going to make another one of these. But just again, to show you, your electron transport chain is moving those positively charged molecules through, okay? With the power of those excited electrons, it's either breaking bonds or it's making bonds, okay? Splitting off things from one molecule, adding them to the other, with the overall goal being ATP creation. So the powering of this ATP synthase, okay? So we've got our NADH molecules being made into ATP. This is the same thing with your FADH molecules, okay? FADH molecules, the electrons are taken off, okay? When those bonds are broken, that energy is released. That energy is used to power your ATP synthase, and your hydrogen ions move across and they create more ATP. Okay.